Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for having me here. Raghu, as you know, we generally use Google stuff, so I'll look to you for a thumbs up to say my slides are actually on screen.
All good.
All right. I'm realizing, too, the Evolving Measurement Strategy, a lofty title for a presentation that is only 10 minutes. But I'll do my best. A little bit of background. What I spend a lot of time doing is not only working on building products and working on machine learning models and go-to-market strategies, but talking to companies and trying to figure out how they're adjusting to the changing world. And that's really what this presentation is about. And there's certainly been a lot of change. Now, it's a very serious thing, but there's also, comics like this that say, if you were to go out and ask people, if you go back to 2019 and say, this is what's going to be popular in 2020, there's not a lot of paths as to how they could see that we would actually arrive here. Even when you look at the individual data for people that are looking to cut their own hair, you can imagine when the lockdown started, you see that spike there. Thankfully, people also asked, should I cut my own hair? And hopefully calmer minds have prevailed. But that on its own would be enough for most advertisers to just figure out changing customer behavior, to say, okay, my customers now want different things in different ways. They're not coming in store, they want curbside pickup. That's a lot to adjust for. But then we're also seeing internally this article from the Wall Street Journal about how some industries are seeing their entire historical models, their pricing models, in this case for airlines, no longer working. And this article really hit how if I wanted to buy a ticket right now from San Jose, which is where I sit, out to my hometown of Chicago, the price that I would pay this week would be the exact same as what I would pay last year. And what if I wanted to book a trip in the future, optimistic about a vaccine, the ticket prices remain the same. And so companies trying to now say, all right, not only do I have changes in consumer behavior, now I have most of my traditional models, especially around pricing, aren't working. And then, as Garrett was mentioning, now we have all the privacy and regulatory and technical changes on top of it. This article here talking about how Apple on their iOS 14 effectively will end app to web tracking. So people clicking from a web ad over to an app where they make a purchase, no longer having that linkage into data. And these are three forces that are causing a lot of concern, a lot of problems for a lot of companies. Now, when one of these existed, so when Apple started rolling out some privacy changes, when third-party cookies were announced that they would be transitioning away in browsers, that was enough for most companies to deal with. They could start seeing the path forward. A lot of what Garrett mentioned, I completely agree with. But then these other factors came in, and what we're seeing is a lot of chaos in terms of, well, what is the right answer? And what we're seeing is actually a change in strategy. In the past, it was simply about replacing the data that was lost. Oh, we're losing this particular piece of data. What can we cobble together that will give us a similar signal? Now we're actually seeing a shift in the strategies that companies use that are having some wider ranging impacts on how they look at measurement as a whole. Now, I have a framework. Frameworks are by their very nature imperfect, but here is a sense of what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of advertisers and companies move from this era of precise measurement to one that is more around prediction. So they're going away from the goal. Originally, it used to be, can we capture more data? To now they're saying, we don't think that's going to be possible to capture more data. What can we do with what we have? And I'm just going to talk about three areas briefly for you. The very first one, which is clearly obvious, is just the shift from third-party data to first-party data. Can we capture more? And in fact, we've even seen companies on the CPG side saying that we want to launch complementary services, ancillary products and services that are likely going to be deep in the red from a profitability side, simply to establish relationships with our consumers and to understand more about who they are and what their preferences are. We've seen companies say, we're less interested now in historical tracking of behaviors and more around what do we think will happen next. Now, the use case of machine learning can certainly be debated. I don't think it should be used in all cases, but they're looking at simply to say, when we look at historical trends of 2018 and 2019, we know they're not going to continue in 2021. So what do we do? What do we expect to happen? And out of all the levers that we can pull, what do we see actually occur with our audience? And then this third one is really fascinating. This is a shift from where experimentation, at least from what we've seen on our side, used to always be around return on ad spend, ROI. Now looking to say, just how can we be better? What can we learn out of the tests that we run about how we now reach these new audiences and these new customers with their new preferences? So this is the overall framework. Now, there's some things inside of this outside of each of these rows that's a little bit different, a little bit interesting. I just want to put them here. And I feel bad because for the time that we have, I can't fully explain all of them. But I think with this audience, I think you'll get a sense of what's interesting and hopefully challenge some of the ways that you're currently seeing the world. The very first one is let's go through a few things on the first party data. We're actually finding that legal compliance with a lot of these laws is driving more integration than the loss of data from the marketing side. Marketers saying that they're losing access to third-party cookies is not persuading the CFO to invest, especially during this time, in multi-million-dollar platform integrations and building identity graphs. But when they look at, for instance, the California Consumer Privacy Act, the risk of being fined by not being able to provide a single view of the customer back to customers that requested in 45 days, they see cost. If it looks at, well, now we have to hire analysts simply to comply with laws and pull the data that customers are requesting, they see more cost. And so now they're actually looking at data integration as being less of a nice to have and more of a way to drive organizational efficiency. Say we don't need people to manually organize all of our data to comply with requests like CCPA, but instead let's actually focus on building a single view of the customer internally. We are seeing just the general uncertainty around what's going to be available in the future, increasing the ownership and the sense of value from the first party data that companies have. And we also see that transparency into data is providing more motivation. And so what's transparency mean? Transparency means that with rules like CCPA, companies have been able to request from other companies a copy of data. So for instance, if I were to go as a California resident to Target, which I have done, and said, can you send me a copy of your data? Target actually provided me with a list that's several hundred rows long of all the individual data points as to how Target understands me. Not surprisingly, when I requested the data from Walmart, I saw that they had a distinctly different schema, some capturing different data points and looking at customers in different ways. So what we're seeing is we're seeing more and more companies be curious to say, what do my competitors have about their customers? And how can we improve and upgrade our ability to capture customer data to match? Otherwise, they worry about falling behind. Difficult part, again, is just in the sense of identity, establishing what it is and how they connect it. Out of all the requests that we ran, and we ran about 200 CCPA requests just to see what companies have. I did this personally to see what companies had on me. There was very little consistency across platforms. In fact, one company sent me a list of nearly 50 different identifiers in their system by which I'm known for. And so companies need to figure that out. The second one is just quickly on machine learning, which is less interest in just capturing everything that's happening and more in saying, well, what can we predict? What do we think is going to happen next? When we go through there, we also see the equation for ML changing just a little bit. And before, and I overly simplify this, it used to mean you need lots of data, lots of computers, and people that know ML. We see an emerging class of products come out, which is changing that equation, which is almost brute forcing some of the tuning that used to be done with ML by hand. And just saying, and again, this is not an endorsement of any Google products, but tools like AutoML is one of the cloud products. It just literally will run 60 to 70,000 different permutations of ML models in different ways it can be tuned to find the optimal result. The net effect of this is that companies start to believe that ML is more accessible. Now, I'm not going to enter into the debate whether it's the right solution, and oftentimes it's not, but companies are feeling more comfortable that it can be within their competencies. And they're starting to say, if we can predict, if we could build these models, they come back and say, what's the business questions we would like to solve? And of course, there is that challenge between hype and reality for a lot of decision makers. And this is the unfortunate part, but it's true. You know, if you're raising VC, you're doing AI. By the time it comes to engineering, you're calling it ML. And by the time the engineers look at it, you're running a regression. That is disrupting a little bit of the credibility in the space, which I'm happy to acknowledge. And the very last thing is just a shift in the decision making. But to make this one real, I wanted to talk about it within the context of attribution. As companies are starting to doubt some of the data that's being captured and the gaps in that data, they're starting to look for more sources of input. So with attribution, before it was a single source of truth, a single model, now they're saying, well, we don't believe any model's perfect. So let's look at multiple models and really focus on where there's differences in that model. They want less trust in just a straight ROI, and instead to say, what are the over and undervalued campaigns? Where are the areas of disagreement in these approaches? And that becomes the basis of experimentation. ROI itself, just too limiting. So instead, what they're saying now is they're saying, look, we don't think that we can hold to an absolute ROI target. Instead, we just want to be better. So what we do today, we just want to be a little bit better than yesterday. And we want to be a little bit better tomorrow than where we started. And that's guiding a lot of this. This is guiding testing in a different way that I'm just unused to seeing over the past decade at Google. It's guiding attribution models to say we don't have a single model. We don't believe anyone's correct. But personally, I find that perspective to be a little bit more refreshing because I think it provides a more sustainable advantage for companies rather than simply saying, what is the ROI in this particular time? All right, so that's just about 10 minutes. A lot of stuff dumped on you. Sorry, I know it's the end of the day, so hopefully you all get to breathe and relax. Again, thank you for the time. Thank you for the presentation and for introducing me, Raghu. I will hand it back to you.